Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time with the rising stars in finance, business, and tech so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I am Chris Snook, and today I welcome back to the show from episode number 16 in early April, Tanvi Ratna. Tanvi, welcome back to the show. We have a lot to unpack, and as the room starts to fill up here, and as you're listening to this on replay, I'm going to put in the show notes as well as in the chat episode 16, because if you're not familiar with Tanvi and her work, we did about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. It is the second best performing episode so far of the Atomic Level's first 36. And it did that by an order of magnitude, 10 times the amount of downloads as any other one. It is number 2 only because Charlie Garcia kicked butt with overall metrics, which followed her shortly thereafter on episode 18. So she is in great company. You are in great company. Tanvi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Man, I cannot believe all the things I'm watching you. I'm trying to follow you and keep up, and I'm getting tired. So you have been for the last 30 some odd days, you'll tell us, but
Yeah.
you have been on the front lines with Undersecretary Chris Wright and several others in Europe, looking at the deal rooms, all the things happening around this realignment, as you say, of Europe. So I want to start there as it relates to this grand strategy, the next world order, what's happening in energy. We're going to move into some other things over the next hour and change here related to the China stuff and everything else. But let's start with where you are right now and just give us kind of the slow, complete boil of what's happening.
Yeah, so let me try and unpack that. I think there's a lot happening on many fronts. A lot of people are looking at Iran and the deal and whether that's happening or not. I've been looking more into there's a lot of deal making that the administration's been a part of, which it's surprising that they haven't talked so much about. And something I've noticed throughout my 12 months of tracking the administration is a lot of big deals they make, they actually don't talk about. So a lot of the real reordering they've done, nothing much has been said, and I'll unpack some of them right now. So for me, the last 30 days have been very, very hectic. They've been a lot of global travel. So I also write a expert column in Fox News, and I've also been covering a bunch of things for Fox News. So a few weeks were spent for me in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, where very big things are underway in Europe. Um, and it's all happening without a whimper. There's some narrative being painted in the mainstream media, but on the big things that are actually happening, I haven't heard much. So I'm happy to unpack that. And then in recent weeks, it's been, the China summit. And right after the China summit, Secretary Rubio was in the Quad summit, which is, Quad is the 4-member Indo-Pacific alliance that was originally formed to contain China in a way. They will keep saying it's for economic cooperation. It is, but, very much formed to contain China.
That's
So
one way to contain, right? Economic cooperation is one way to contain.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it just came out of those big summits and events, and a lot of direct discussions with the White House staff, and some interviews of senior folks, which I'll be releasing soon. So yeah, happy to start wherever you like.
Let's start with, you made a comment that I want to unpack and kind of get into some granular detail with, because that's what Substack is for. That's what this podcast is for. You made a comment about a lot of the big deals that are being done, or this reordering that is happening, is not something that is being broadcast by the administration or by anybody like overtly. And I say that almost like not surprised, but a little surprised, because again, we have an administration that is happy to tell you everything that they think they're doing,
Yeah.
and is as prolific as probably any outfit ever in that role of doing so. And yet either the volume of deals being done is just too great for a 24/7 news cycle, no matter how prolific they want to broadcast it, or there are some really important and big things happening that are strategically being quieter, and you're in front of them. So let's talk about what you think some of those things are, because that's what we're trying to do, is read between the headlines that are not there and understand where the world's moving, where energy's moving, where the world order's moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So my read is that's more of the latter, because they are really trying to hedge the relationship with China, and we saw that in the summit, right? So there's not like overt talk of how they're getting into Chinese spheres of influence, but it's happening, right? And let me talk about Europe. So in Europe, there's on three fronts that I have seen this happening. A lot of it has been slow burn, and we've all seen it, but now this is fructifying and it changes on the ground, and that's what I've been writing about in my Substack as well. So I'll start with NATO since it's the most obvious, and most Americans are quite aware that NATO is not something Trump's happy with. And it's been a year of the administration constantly laying it on the Europeans that they need to do more on defense. They cannot rely on blanket U.S. security cover. American taxpayers cannot be paying for Europe's security and things like that. And for a lot of months, like it was getting heard, but it was mostly with some irritation on the European side. And you didn't really see major moves. Yes, you did see the spending go up, defense spending, but there were some countries doing it, some not so much. Like Poland was spending close to 5%. Some others are, still at 2%, 3%, but there was some consensus forming around spending more. And then you see like much heavier pressure being levied on the Europeans. And it happens very fast, and it happens while people are distracted with Iran. So towards the end of January, you have the national defense strategy launched by the Pentagon, and what it says in a nutshell is that the US's pretty much, pulling out of Europe. And there's a message that is, not something people talk about enough, but they essentially said something to the lines of, the Russian threat. Well, Europe is richer and more powerful and populous than Russia. So Europe, you deal with Russia, like this is pretty much
Right. I mean, you kind of have to deal with the neighbor no matter what, right? I mean,
yeah. So this is a broad message, and they say, I mean, officially they say something to the line of, the security on the continent. The U.S. is always there to support with heavy lifting capabilities. The nuclear umbrella and things like that. But the primary responsibility is off the allies. And so that message goes very clearly in the new policy, right? And within 3 weeks of that, something that's not reported enough is three major NATO commands on the continental security, the Arctic, and the South, like the Mediterranean. They are handed over to Europeans. So American command leaves, and it's handed over to new countries. So it's not this Franco-German alliance anymore, which is sort of defined Europe for all of us. Like for all of us, Europe is Western Europe, you know, so
right.
France and
I mean,
Germany or
that, that doesn't mean we're leaving our assets there and letting other people run them. That means we're pulling our assets out, whether it be ships, troops, what have you, and we're requiring NATO troops or somebody else to step up. Or what does that mean in mechanics?
yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So it doesn't. So the asset drawdowns are a separate thing.
Okay.
So that you would have seen some news around. Oh, we're saying we'll pull troops out of Germany. There's a lot of defense equipment that has not reached Europe. Even though they were supposed to get deals, but a lot of that equipment's going to Hormuz and stuff like that. So that's a separate piece on the assets. But what it means is all the operational planning, all the, like, you can say the military heavy lifting around defending the continent, this has kind of been, handed over.
Okay.
Like Europeans, it's your thing. And what the US has done, it has kept allied commands. So it's kept like the overall commands that coordinate all these theaters, and U.S. has kept nuclear command. Of course, it's kept the nuclear umbrella. But this just happened very quietly. And the first thing is that this was handed over after many, many like decades of just these posts always being held by Americans, right? So this happened quietly, and then also um, what happened with it is a lot of new countries from Europe are getting promoted. It's not the standard Western European countries. So, one of the main commands against Russia, for example, Poland has been given a central role. Yeah, it's
And
Germany, but
that has been dictated by us, the US, or is that something that's been like just who wants to do it? Like, how's the process look for promoting other countries to a leadership role in NATO?
it's not a very transparent process, but I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of US influence in
Yeah.
how things get allocated. So Poland has been elevated. Italy has been elevated in the south. So it's going to take over Mediterranean command. It's not Spain because we're having some trouble with Spain.
Yeah, a little bit.
Um, so so this has happened, and then the Arctic, right? So the Arctic command, so Finland, Sweden, these are actually new countries to NATO. They joined after the Ukraine war, and they weren't still fully integrated in the operations, and now they've been elevated, and the UK has been given this command, even though it operates from Virginia, so essentially it's like a US command. But so these three commands have been elevated. It's not the Western Europe side which is getting focus. It's the High North, the Arctic, it's the Mediterranean, and it's Eastern Europe, right? So this has happened militarily. Um, but now when you see what I saw on the ground in Europe with Chris Wright's visit and things, is economically also everything is moving in that direction. So I can start with the energy piece.
Yeah, let's start with energy because I mean nothing happens without energy. So let's start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the energy theater, something that again people don't know, maybe, is that in December, Europe actually passed a law to essentially ban Russia from all European energy within a year. Like by 2027, they are going to force cut off all Russian, especially the gas supply, right? And this is something that's been in the works for a while. It's it's sort of. I also feel like the reason the Hormuz episode is happening this year is because a lot of these things had to happen.
Hmm.
Otherwise it would have made sense for the US to do it in July, like last year. They already had struck Iran and, struck the Fordo site and stuff. They could have just gone ahead and, like done the larger operation, but they didn't. So in December, Europe passes this law. And then an interesting thing happens is Europe starts fishing for energy partners, so the German chancellor has this trip to the Middle East, and he's exploring signing deals with Qatar and Saudi and all these countries. He's visiting all the countries. Um, and there's also this whole thing building in Europe about how they don't want to get locked into one partner after coming out of this Russian dependency. And suddenly the attack happens, the Hormuz thing happens, and now all the incentives of the market change, you know, and now I think it's almost 70 to 80% of European energy needs are now locked into American supply. It's American LNG, it's a and, what I witnessed on the ground, so I was in, Eastern Europe. I was in Croatia, Dubrovnik, where they shot Game of Thrones, actually,
I
in that.
love that part of the planet. Yeah, it's beautiful there.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and actually, like, this is real life Game of Thrones, like, it's happening
Hmm.
in that city,
Yeah,
because they're basically dethroning Western Europe, and all the American investment and key choke points and energy entry points and things are moving into Eastern Europe. So they signed this huge energy deal with the port of Kirk. It's in Croatia. And they're going to bring in US energy there. And then they're going to build pipelines from there, supply Western Europe, and supply energy right up to Ukraine.
okay.
Right, and there's kind of preparation going on for, when the post-Ukraine phase, like, once Ukraine is out of the war and the reconstruction happens, there's groundwork being laid for all the energy lines, the
Right.
infrastructure lines, and things like that. So, huge energy deals.
Makes a
On
lot of sense because you can't reconstruct an area if you have to take the raw materials and resources to do it from thousands of miles away. If you can take it from, less, right, then you can reconstruct it more effectively, and also there's a large profit center there, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and also, like, energy from not Russia, right? So
Right,
they're
yeah,
trying to wean Ukraine out of Russia. They're trying to wean Eastern Europe out of Russian energy. And also a big project that the ambassador of the US there has signed, which is moving the Balkans out of Russian energy as well. So there's a energy pipeline to Bosnia, Albania, also, I think Moldova. These are countries that are not part of the EU, but they are the Balkans, and they've always been in the gray zone between Russia and Europe. So there's a push to, like, push out Russian influence from that whole region, right? And on the back of energy, they signed this massive AI data center deal,
mm.
and there's a lot of tech investment and things like that are getting planned, not out of Germany or France, but from Poland, you know,
What
which
about
is yeah,
Has Bulgaria come up in anything like that? And the only reason I ask is I had an office there years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, with a lot of developers, and there's a lot of tech talent and back-end development talent
yeah,
there, as
yeah,
there is tech talent in Ukraine. But I'm just curious when it came to the AI deals, has Bulgaria come up in any of that? Just because it seems like an interesting
yeah.
strategic node as well.
It is, but I think it hasn't been as active with the Americans. So Croatia, Romania, Slovakia, Poland, especially, like, these have been really active. And Croatia, I think, has succeeded in making itself a base for a lot of things. And Poland is really seen as, like, the continental headquarter for most of this work. So there's a lot of a concerted American push to move the power center out of Western Europe into Eastern, because Eastern Europe is also the fastest growing region of Europe. Like, most of Europe is slowing down growth wise, but this whole segment is, like, really growing very fast. So you see the US, like, using that, and like actually leaning into that and saying we're going to support this shift
Mm.
into this side of Europe.
Very interesting. So some of the deals to re-unpack that. So some of the deals that we haven't heard of were I don't think seen a lot about the AI data center deal in. I think you said it was in Croatia. I don't think I've
Right.
seen a lot about the port deal related to energy. And what what if anything does some of the stuff happening over there have to do with Genesis mission? Are they totally different? Because all of that falls under right as well with Undersecretary Dario Gil on the side of science and everything, and this national security effort around Genesis mission, which I have some friends working on. Um, Is any of that come up in these conversations as it relates to Europe or not? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think because the Genesis mission is more focused on research, I think that will take more of these, tie-ups with labs and universities and things like that. One thing that, there was like a closed door dinner with Secretary Wright and Undersecretary of State and a lot of officials, and they were harping upon, just how rich the technical talent is in Eastern Europe, and in some cases, it's even there's a cost advantage they have. They're even cheaper than Chinese talent, and in many ways, like it's cheaper to build in Croatia than Shenzhen, in China. So I think they are very much looking to leverage that, but it was more infrastructure right now, and I think they're around that build a lot of momentum for venture investments and other tie-ups, like the financiers were there, the DFC was there, the Exim Bank was there, and this is what I hear is very much the focus now is to look at, well, now if we're providing infrastructure, how do we broad base investor interest in this region and really get things going, because there's a lot of, how do you say, political alignment. I mean, there were 9 presidents in that conference, all the Eastern European country. Like, there's a lot of buy-in politically into this. Unlike a lot of other places where the U.S. is going, I mean, they're all in, so things can move really fast.
What would you say the sentiment or the vibes of those meetings were from the participants? Was there enthusiasm? Was there was it more reactionary? Are those 9 presidents kind of excited that they have a seat at the table in a new way, or are they trying to take advantage of it? Like, if you were to just kind of take a temperature of the sentiment around Secretary Rubio or Secretary Wright's presence and the people that are participating in it, how would you kind of explain that?
Yeah, I think it was very clear, unequivocal support and excitement. I think they were even past that to the phase of let's get this going, like let's get this like big. It wasn't even just consensus building, like they're just bought into the mission. And this is very different. Like, I've been on many different such settings now, and it's very clear that there's a lot of momentum there.
Interesting. I think sometimes you hear about that, but I just that's why I want to just ask, like, kind of your gut level, because again, I don't know that I mean, that's important, right? Whatever the because consensus is one thing, but enthusiasm or let's execute in kind of alignment is a different level of consensus.
Absolutely.
It means you're kind of going, and there's not going to be you're not going to look back and ponder and wonder what if, right? You're just going
Yeah.
to so that tells us a lot, I think, on where things are going. What are some of the other, I guess, not surprises, but things that you think are important as it relates to the grand strategy? And for those who are new to this conversation that may have not had the chance yet to listen to episode 16, just give us the high level again of what you call the grand strategy. Like, let's just make sure we level set everybody on that for a minute.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's evident to everybody now that there is a big global realignment underway. The Why a lot of people are confused is because for a long time we've all worked inside what we call the neoliberal consensus. The liberal international order, which believed in you can say cooperation over conflict, the role of institutions, the idea that open trade was a way to create incentivized cooperation and spread common ideals rather than, lead to like zones of influence and things like that. So, this is basically the world order that most of us have grown up with. We've seen the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, IMF, and UN, and things like this. And this is what we believed is the right way of doing things, right? now what has happened and why what people a lot of people just term as chaos is actually it's actually a complete departure from that model, because now the starting premise of the administration is that this is not the order that works, and it's not the order that works in the American interest. And because of this idea of so how do you have free and open trade and the role of institutions in the world? It's not because every country magically accepts the role of these institutions. The global order, as we say, is defined by anarchy. There is nobody who has a say over other countries. There is only, military might eventually settles differences. Institutions were not so powerful, at least not before the World War, right? So the way institutions became powerful was because of the silent backing of the US military.
Hmm.
And also in a way, the public goods that the US military provided, which were things like open waterways. You didn't like Hormuz could not be weaponized, not just because there is a UN law, but because, people would defend the openness of that waterway with military might, right? And this is exactly the case study you see Trump sort of bring to light. He's saying, okay, Hormuz is closing. Uh, well, we don't really import from Hormuz, so, maybe we don't want to do anything about it. And then all the countries are like, no, like you're the aggressor. And like, of course, this is a complex problem, but it's bringing to light that maybe there has to be joint policing of these things. Like, it can't just be like one military, one country that has to go in and do everything. Um, so the basis of the liberal order changes, and now we are, Trump terms it the America First system. I think in terms of the academic framework around this, is the closest considered one is modern mercantilism. Modern mercantilism is seen as the framework around this, but this is basically a framework where it's not about a globally free and open system. It's where there's zones of influence, there's balance of power. Every country is optimizing for sovereignty, because the whole school of economics is different. Like, so you would have heard earlier about the comparative advantage, like every country produces for its comparative advantage. Like, that is all gone now. Like, you no longer just produce for comparative advantage, you also produce for sovereignty. So even if the US doesn't have an advantage in producing steel, it's going to produce steel anyway because it needs that in the event of war, right?
Hmm.
So the whole basis of everything is changing. And that is the underlying phenomena for the chaos that we
I
see.
think I think that's such a interesting point, that because again, there's like the rhetoric that you say to deflect what you're actually doing. There's the rhetoric you say to inspire the base, right, in your voting block. There's the rhetoric you say to agitate your enemy in the voting block, or in the two-party system, or whatever that may be, whether it's in Europe or here. Um, a la, Sun Tzu, right? Art of War. If your enemy is agitated, make them angrier, type of thing. So there's like all of that. And then there's like what you just said, which was what's actually happening. We're basically saying we're done being Papa Bear, covering everybody's, bills and expenses and needs. And we're going to keep doing what we do, but we're going to make you step up. You're going to have to grow up and do your part, whatever your part is, wherever you are. You're going to optimize for sovereignty. So we're actually giving you a gift. If you look at it that way, maybe it doesn't feel like that way in the short term, but sovereignty is a good thing,
Yeah.
right? Sovereignty, at least I believe it is. So we're going to give you this thing called sovereignty, but you're going to have to do deals. You're going to have to now optimize for both sovereignty and um, the market. And you're going to have to figure it out. And then, uh, so that realignment is kind of based on a complete, like you said, a complete fundamental shift in the post-war order,
Yeah.
and almost like we're trying to create. And I'm saying this for you to, you know, run with, almost as if you put all of the rhetoric and all of the triggering aside and you just try to look at it for what is actually happening and what do I like about it, what do I not like about it, what do I agree with, what do I not agree with, what do I have questions about. We're basically trying to create the next 100-year order, which is we're due for, if you've read Fourth Turning by Neil Hallam Strauss, without as much global conflict. Like, we're trying to avoid the world war that has always predated this shift.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean there won't be bombs, because there have been and there will be. It means we're trying to avoid the shooting war version that usually gets us here by doing this mercantilism version of rapid and aggressive deal making that underwrites a whole new economy and rule set. Is that kind of an accurate frame of what you just said?
Yes, this is sort of my reading of things, and this is what I laid out in the last episode as well. That usually this sort of a rejig, it doesn't happen in peacetime. It only happens at the end of a war because nobody willingly wants to change the status quo. Like China benefited immensely from the status quo. A lot of rising Asian economies, which are doing this model of what was called the export-led growth model. Right, they exported their way into developed economies, like Taiwan did it. You know, Singapore did it. Right, so if you close off a world where you have open and free trade, and you don't have, you know, you can export your way to growth, you're taking away that world. Like, that's not something that countries are going to willingly agree to. Right, and I think for me, as a geopolitical watcher, analyst for a long time, that explains a lot of the unpleasantness, you know, that has accompanied the whole shift, because this is not something anyone would do willingly. I mean, even NATO's reordering, you know, it's taken like so many months, and actually, it's taken so many years because every president says it. Trump also said it in his first term, but they couldn't get it through. But now it's happening, you know. So instead of a war, it's just taken, you know, like a sort of boorish, you know, um, maybe an obstinate stance on things.
Where do you think, I know the focus of your work is around the theater of Europe and EMEA primarily. Let's touch on China a little bit, because
Yeah,
you mentioned that. And then if you don't have any thoughts on kind of what's happening in Latin America or kind of the Western Hemisphere, that's fine. I'm just curious. I want to give you as long of a leash as you have to try and help us understand how you're making sense of this. Um,
yeah,
because I think a lot of these pieces, as you said, are happening in stages, not because they couldn't have happened all at once last July, but because other levers had to fall in place on other people's timelines before it would make sense to really push. If you're committed to seeing this through, and it's obvious, I think, listening to you, that there's a commitment to see this through. This is not just throwing a fit in chaos. There's a strategy here, and there's a commitment to see it through for better or for worse.
yeah,
And more people have aligned to it for whatever reasons they've aligned to it than maybe people think. So, what happens now post the meeting in China last, couple weeks ago? And what do you
yeah.
think? What do you think the net takeaway was from that? Was that an effective meeting? Was it kind of status quo neutral? Both sides are still kind of.
Yeah. I think these are all great questions. So I'm actually gonna take them one by one. I think the
Yeah.
first thing is on the commitment to seeing things through. I think that itself needs to be emphasized a little bit, because I think a lot of what the problem is, like, this approach to diplomacy hasn't been seen ever. You know, so a lot, because you know, typically governments, like, they plan out everything, outcomes and everything, then they announce a program and then they enter it, and it's like, but here what's happening is it's like a very iterative approach. It's like, okay, let's say my end goal is I want a peace deal in Ukraine. It's like, okay, maybe I will start direct talks, but then maybe I will start, pressurizing Russian energy. Maybe I'll tell, hey, India, don't buy Russian energy or we won't give a deal. Well, that you think it's about India, but no, it's putting pressure on Russia. It's like forcing it to come to the table. Or maybe I'll say, hey, I'm entering the Balkans and, I'm going to start pushing Russia out of the Balkans. And there's a lot of these, everything's on the table, like every instrument is used. This itself was never done, right? And then you're also being iterative about it. And I think that's also why they don't announce, they may say, oh, this is our goal, this is also our goal, and they change their word at the end of it. And then everybody thinks it's because, oh, they don't know what they're doing. Okay, so but they're getting the deals they want. Like they've pushed Russia out of the region. They've managed to get India out of Russian oil and into deals with the US. Like, um, you know, the- they're actually getting what they want. It's just that it all looks like a fluke, and it looks like,
Well, I
because we've
think
never, yeah,
again, without taking a position politically on it, I think there's a consensus that people want it to be a fluke. There's a big portion that want everything that works to be a fluke because of a certain feeling they may have about the administration or who's in charge. But
yeah,
again, if you can take the emotion out of it and you can just look at the pragmatism, you have diplomacy, which is a whole different skill, and you have governance, which is a whole different skill than innovation and entrepreneurship. But you have kind of this entrepreneurial approach to
yes,
government. And
yeah,
that is a native entrepreneurial approach. Whether you like the entrepreneurs behind it or not, is not the point. The point is the objective, as Napoleon said, I care only about the objective, the obstacle must give way. If you look at it through that lens and you say, well, is there a clear objective? That's been clear. And then everything else is really irrelevant until it is relevant in the playbook. Unpacking what you said, right? There's like this commitment to the objective,
yeah.
and we're just going to get there. And if somebody changes where the cheese is, we're going to move over here. And if somebody needs a little pressure, we're going to go over here and pressure them. And if somebody needs to be bombed, we're going to bomb them. And if somebody is willing to sign a deal without being bombed, then we're going to sign a deal.
Yeah. And I think in terms of like do they have overarching beliefs or commitments? I think like take the recent issue of his long post on Israel, like all the Arab countries must normalize with Israel, like that created an uproar. And that's what I wrote a recent tweet thread on it. This is exactly what he's tried to do since 2020. Like, why the Abraham Accords? What were the Abraham Accords? Why do they matter? Because Israel has always been on the outside of the Arab world. It's kind of that little part that's sitting in a very hostile region, and it's always been outside any arrangement. So it's not part of the Gulf GCC or any arrangement. It's just not part of it. It's not a part of the region institutionally. So the Abraham Accords is the first attempt to create, you know, a regional order with Israel. But the problem is that Saudi doesn't join that order. And if you don't have the regional hegemon in that order, how can you guarantee any stability? So a big portion of everything has been to get Saudi, get maybe Turkey, like the regions that have influence on the Arab world, like get them into an alliance with Israel. And that's actually what the Board of Peace was. If you see, the Board of Peace was actually an expanded Abraham Accords. It was all around Gaza reconstruction stuff. But it was a way to bring them on the table. And that worked for a while. And then it failed by October of last year because Saudi public opinion turned very anti Board of Peace. It turned into like very opposed to being on the same table with Israel, right? And then Saudi backtracks, and that's when that kind of collapses, and the Gaza peace deal kind of stalls, and Board of Peace is stalled. Um, but now you see him bringing it up again, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're just saying random stuff," and like, "Where's it coming from?" And I'm like, "That's always what he's been doing," like.
Well,
Unless you
I mean, and again, I ran through that lens also, like as a lever, you have the lever against China and making something strong enough to kind of balance out the Taiwan threat, and then you also have the Iran thing kind of bringing Saudi back into a conversation that isn't just, playing nice on TV or at conferences like FII. Like you're recognizing that you're able to influence, but you're not able to control everything. But you have tremendous influence. And so you're going to do the push pull
yeah.
until you get things where they are sovereign, but do what you want. In other words, the best way to get somebody to do something is make them think it's their idea. So you are trying to make them think it's their idea to be sovereign so
Mhm.
that they do what you want and align in the order that you're trying to create as the hegemon.
Yes, because that's what they're doing. Now they're taking more responsibility for regional security. Now Saudi's arming up, UAE's arming up. They're building an Iron Dome, like they are taking frontline
Well,
responsibility for
they don't
everything.
have a choice, right? Because the attacks showed that all of a sudden this vision of UAE and Saudi being safe was shattered by drones, right? So they don't really have a choice to take that security on either for their own
Yes,
economies and for the kind of the thing that's been built up over the last 20 years around that region being kind of the neutral Switzerland of the GCC. Like now that's kind of been brought into question a little bit and they have to restore that.
yes, I do think they've managed it pretty well. Like, there's a lot of people I know did not leave Dubai, and they're very happy with the security they got. There was this Pavel Durov tweet, right, where he said, for paying $0 in taxes, I get better security than paying like so many tens of thousands in Europe. Because nothing really got through apart from one or two missiles. So I think the believers in that region, I don't see that they've left Dubai per se. Yes, a lot of capital did move to Singapore, from what I heard. But the bigger story from this U.S. reordering perspective is, maybe there wasn't much of it. It was just American bases on their soil. Now their own armies are rearming, and they're doing it very rapidly, and there didn't need to be like 6 months of diplomacy to convince them. It just happened. um
Yeah.
so I think that is helping, because then it's not just US resources, in the Middle East. They're not getting sucked to the Middle East. Like, as the defense strategy said, their focus is the Indo-Pacific. And that does bring me to China. So that is where I've kind of been in recent times. I'm happy to,
Yeah,
address that.
let's go right into that. I want to understand how you unpack the last couple of weeks leading up
Yeah.
to and also post summit.
Yeah, so I think on China, I think this is the really tricky one, where I think a lot of analysts are just um waiting and watching for what starts shifting around the world to really ascertain what got negotiated there
Mhm.
in China, because it was like a very cloaks and daggers sort of visit, right? Like, you see everyone's praising each other, and there's a lot of effusive sort of like commentary, but then that, oh, they were all on burner phones, they threw away everything, Trump apparently didn't eat anything in China, like that there were spies at the dinner, and like all this stuff is like coming out. And nothing has come out from the CEOs who were there. Like, why did they go? Like, what happened? Like, why were there so many CEOs? But now there's some stuff coming out, right? So there
Why
was
why specifically did they pick up Jensen in like Alaska, right? And there's been speculation around those things, but all I can glean from it, and I'll let you keep going, is that when big stuff happens and all those kinds of power players are in one place and the sheer cost of getting them there, the
yeah,
security around it, the risk associated with it, lets you know that the magnitude of this deal is not something you're going to be able to pick up in a soundbite.
yeah,
It's just
absolutely, yeah.
common
But then
sense happen in
you're
the South.
st but you're seeing, like, big political things happen because after that, so US pauses arms sales to Taiwan, but also immediately after that, Secretary Rubio, comes to New Delhi and there is a Quad ministers meeting. And the Quad, which is this, big security alliance. They say it's an economic technological cooperation alliance. It is basically four countries. It's a quadrilateral around China, right? So you have the U.S., you have Japan, you have Australia, and you have India, and they cover the Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, all of that region, which is essential to Chinese shipping and Chinese military activity and all of that, right? So, if everything's great with China, well, why are you going and activating a containment block? you know and why is that your next action after like visiting China? So I actually when there with Secretary Rubio's delegation, I kind of arrived along with, just because this is a big deal, like what is really happening on the ground. And so I got access to some it was quite mind-blowing what I saw there. I'm going to start writing on it, but I'll give some first peeks on your show.
Yeah, and by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet to Tom V, you are missing a tremendous amount of depth on all of these things, both pre this interview and also. So please just make sure you do that today. You can click the button to subscribe and let's get a sneak peek. But I know because the long form that you write is brilliant. It's how we connected because I was reading your stuff without knowing you at all and just blown away by the insights I was getting from it. And then I reached out to you several weeks or months ago now and said,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'd love to have you on the show because I was a fan of your unique writing around this." So I can't say enough great things about your writing. So go ahead. So pleasure our audience for tuning in with some of the things that are to come.
No, thank you, Chris. I appreciate your support. Like I said, like I'm very new to all this. I've never been like, I've always worked behind the scenes in government and stuff. So this is all very new to me. So I'm very thankful to everyone who subscribes and supports my work. So on the Quad, so on China, I think um, now you're seeing things that are coming out after the visit. So um, you have a summit. Everyone is like, "Oh, this is a nothing burger. Like, we don't know what happened. No announcement. Like, no joint statement. No real deals. Nothing's announced." But then, the Taiwan arms sale get paused. There is news that China is pressurizing Russia to end the war in Ukraine, like
Mhm.
it's taking a harder stance. I'm waiting for verified reports on that. Secretary Rubio comes to New Delhi, which is very integral to their China plus one, China containment strategy and everything. In terms of India's probably the only large country, India and Japan, which are fundamentally opposed to China. Korea and others still kind of deal a lot, but if there's one country that will absolutely economically oppose China, it's actually India. Like they even banned TikTok when the US didn't, like they are just very hard line on that. So so he comes to New Delhi, and the big question in Delhi was that, is the Quad alive or dead? Because it is like there's been no attention. There were some meetings of the ministers, but there hasn't been a leaders level summit. Like, is this important or things like that? So the foreign ministers meet of these four countries, and they've announced like very expanded set of initiatives. So now they're sharing like near real time maritime intelligence. They set up like a bunch of new initiatives around maritime shipping and what they call freedom of navigation, free and open Indo-Pacific. I think it's a Japanese framework. Um, so they are, locking into that. And then they have launched a new critical minerals initiative of around the trusted supply chain. So just like we saw with Pax Silica, but there are some, you're seeing some of these parallel groupings, right, which are emerging around that, but the trusted alliance. So there's a critical minerals thing. There's a new standard sort of initiative that they've launched. So they want to have common standards across telecom, digital identity, some AI usage and things like that. So they are now, it is revived, the framework of the Quad, and they are building now deeper, more of these new
Who
ways
are
to
the
get
members
it.
of the Quad? So India is one. Who else
Yeah.
is in that? Is that Japan as well, or who else is in that?
Yeah, so it's the four members of the quadrilateral. So Japan, Australia, India, and US.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this is the quadrilateral around China.
And then where do like the other Indo-Pacific, like Philippines or Indonesia, do they fit anywhere in this equation, especially with some of their, you know, natural capital resources or things like that? Or no, they're just benefactors of it.
I mean, there may be an expansion of the Quad. Like they haven't locked in which alliance is going to be the future alliance, because um there was a lot of speculation that the Quad is the new NATO and things like that. But uh, right now, they are refraining from talking about a militarization angle. Like we had some briefings with the secretary, also foreign minister of Japan, and things like that. And I specifically asked them if there's any militarization angle that was discussed or mentioned, or even like it's there in the long term. And they're very hesitant about bringing that up because they're all also hedging with China.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay, so then let's talk about some of the other unspoken insights that you witnessed or think might unveil. Like if you had a crystal ball, we're not going to hold you to being 100% right, but just curious, what do you think the risks are, or what do you think is not risky but everyone else does?
That's a good question. I think on the critical mineral side, something that I'm seeing, which I know a lot of people are like piling into it from an investment standpoint. I think there's actually um not many robust players in that space. I mean, there's some. I tried in interviewing a lot of the economic officers in the Quad, and for example, in India, like there isn't even one company which is entering this market because they know the minute they enter it, they will be undercut by Chinese supply. And so a lot of businesses like hesitating to so we have the narrative of countering China, and industrial goods and things like that. But the on ground reality of it is something that, I'm really starting to explore now. And it's not as easy as it sounds, like yes, a lot of people are getting together, a lot of countries are cooperating, but will they actually succeed as businesses? Like, will they actually enter and produce and be able to sell at a certain level? Like, it's going to take a lot of industrial policy, in my opinion. And we haven't seen that yet, right? Like, for example, like these Quad countries, if they want to build a critical mineral supply chain to counter Chinese supply chains, they maybe need to offer price floors to all their companies that you will get a premium price. Like if you are building, from this country, I can guarantee you market share at this premium price. Otherwise, no business house is entering this space, because China will undercut my business tomorrow. So why should I invest so much capex? Like this kind of counterintuitive, right, to what you think.
It seems like when we brought the amount of weight and gravity that we brought to Beijing for that meeting all the CEOs and the entire, principles of the administration. Like we brought everything. Uh, that that's not just a show of respect. That is a show of we recognize. I'm saying this. This is my opinion. It's not necessarily true. I read that as we showed that we understand that we're the hegemony, but we really can't decouple from you. And so we also showed that we're going to ask you to do some things you don't want to do, but we're also going to probably trade some things we didn't want to do. And we're going to bring everyone who can make those decisions so that at least we'll keep our word. We can't trust you to keep your word, but that we're bringing all these people because you can look them in the eye and not just say that I'm going to go make them do it. That's how I kind of read that action as a lever. It was a serious, I think, tactic of not only negotiation but also showing the commitment to see this through. Back to our earlier point, because you just don't bring that level of weight and principality to a meeting
Yeah.
unless you're trying to shorten the curve on that deal diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very valid hypothesis, but like I said, we have to see what really comes out. I mean, there is the narrative of, the US will enter these grand bargains with China and Russia. It'll put behind like decades of animosity, and it will basically come to a sort of fragile but commit to a kind of peace with them where we coexist. And maybe they have their spheres of influence, like maybe China has the ASEAN region, Russia has the Balkans, US has the Western Hemisphere. This is one theory that has been put forward since Trump took office, is that he might just negotiate these grand bargains. And if he does
Almost
that, then
like a trilateral type of deal. Is that what you're getting at when you say grand bargain? Like a
it, yeah, it may not be a deal as such. It's more like a balance of power. So it's a balance of power that will exist broadly, like it existed between empires in Europe. Like they
Mhm.
expand to the level they can, and then they kind of manage relations with each other, right? So something like this has been put forward. I think they call it the ARC, like the America, Russia, China kind of chessboard. But I don't know if that's happening because I'm not sure that China is willing to play with that. Like it's not clear that China is interested. If China's not interested, then you cannot really work it out with Russia either. So I think that's why you see the China wizard now, because a lot of the rest of the chessboard is aligned, like the Western Hemisphere, the Middle East, Europe, India, like these places are coming into alignment. So now leaves the final pieces, which are Ukraine, Russia, China, right? And first you settle China because China is not something you can just have a breakthrough deal with. Like all your American policy is about China, but I don't think that this visit particularly is about breakthrough in China. It's about coming to some understanding with the Chinese that helps you settle the rest of the war.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. A good insight, because how I look at it is right or wrong. I feel like there was a lot of reasons for Iran, but one of the if you think through that lens, it's the thing that you have to have for a lot of reasons, but it also is the thing that really causes a lot of problems and pain if it's left unsettled for China. And so it becomes the thing where you say, okay, look, I'm going to take, and I'm really paraphrasing, going out on a limb here. I'm not saying this is happening, but if you had a thesis that said, we're going to take the left half of the planet, the Western half, right? We're going to handle that. That's us. Fine. You can have the right side. Here's where we're going to kind of bridge the middle, whatever that looks like. But if you're going to have the right side, that means you got to get Russia to play. You got to do that. I've done my part. You got to do that now, G. And oh, by the way, IRGC, like this whole mess over here, you fix it. I need your help. You want to do it? You want to run half the world? Fine. You fix that with me. I'm not saying it's that simple, because it's certainly not, but it feels like it's almost like, okay, if this is how you want it to go, here's how I would see that happening. And if you're willing to step up, then I can consider it. Is that the overly simplified version of something different than ARC?
Um, I think that is that is a maybe a good analogy for what this grand bargain concept is that I'm talking about. It would look something like that. So maybe the U.S. says like they're willing to give a concession on Taiwan, but then China has to pull Russia out of Ukraine, or it has to force Iran IRGC to settle. Uh, it could be things like that, but we'll only know once we see what happens over the next few weeks. Because one very interesting thing that just happened yesterday is the US has picked up the card of, China has some red lines, like Tibet as one, the Uyghurs are another, Taiwan is another. And so, on one hand, the US says, like, we'll pause arms sales to Taiwan. And just yesterday, I saw the assistant undersecretary. He has recognized the Tibetan elections and US friendship with the Tibetan government in exile, because the Tibetan government of the Dalai Lama has been in exile in India, actually, since the 60s or so, I think. Um, so, the US is also playing different cards with China. And that's why I'm saying, like, I'm going to see what happens the next
Yeah, I
couple of
want to
weeks.
get to a question from the audience that's coming in on live stream, because I think I think Randy asked it in a way that is cleaner than how I would have asked it, and it's something I've been thinking about. Right, so you have one man rule in China, Xi, right? He's president for life, and then you have democracies like us, where depending on how the midterms go, right, things could get gridlocked further or not. No matter what, this is the final term of this president. And so we don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe there's a continuation with someone else. But his point is, how does, a powerful command control one man rule economy do a deal with a genuine democracy like us or others, where the dramatic swings in leadership can happen every 2 to 4 years? And like, how does that get structured when we're talking about, as we started this, kind of the world order for the next 100 years? And I know we're moving at a pace that is as fast as you've ever seen anything move, and with as much material accuracy or impact as you've ever seen anything move in diplomacy in this last 18 months. But that's also necessary, because how much do you think this thing could be unwound, or tread backwards, or create a vacuum again if there are changes on the Democratic side of its leadership? And is Xi just waiting for that to play out?
I think that's a great question. I think actually the answer from a Chinese lens is counterintuitive to what Randy asks, because from the Chinese perspective, at least from everything I hear from the foreign policy circles, they're actually happier with Trump than other presidents, because every president is more and more hawkish on China, but Trump is actually pragmatist, right? So if he sees that some kind of settlement is possible, or you can give a bigger deal to America over Ukraine, and then like we can come to some kind of settlement over Taiwan or something. The read in China is that Trump might be like much more amenable to that than someone like, say, Rubio, right? Because Rubio was even sanctioned in China because he's very hawkish on China. And so honestly, within China, they see Trump as a lesser evil than, what they had, which is very counterintuitive for Americans to see, because we see that everything's about China. We see like, we're just re-gearing to like, put up the fight in China, things like that. But actually, I think Trump is seen as much more pragmatic than other presidents.
I think that's the right way to, yeah, frame it. If you take all the emotional things you like or don't like about any of these leaders out of it, and you just look at when they deal with each other, as much uncertainty as both of them, or all of them, Putin being a third one, as much uncertainty as they can bring, and as much of a multi-dimensional chess player as each of them are, they recognize they recognize and respect, I think, that in each other in a way where they go, well, if we're going to get something done, we should probably try and get it done for our purposes or whatever in this window, simply because we know we can focus on pragmatism.
Yeah.
And the minute we have to focus on something other than pragmatism, because we now have to bring in public opinion or some other dynamic or loyalties or hawkishness versus dovishness, because that's just how we were, indoctrinated. As soon as we have to bring in another element than pragmatism, the playbook completely changes. So while we have three pragmatists, whether you like them as human beings or not, let's figure this out. Is that's how I kind of read what you just said.
Yeah. I think let's make a deal, like that's the motto, like that that captures uh,
Who we got to send? How we got to send Howie over there, right? Howie Mandel, wasn't that his show? Make a deal, guys.
as a
Great question, Randy. And yeah, keep some coming. If you have some other ones, anybody in the live audience, feel free to throw some more. We'll do our best to get to them as we wind this down. Let's circle back to where we began, and now let's think about potential winners and losers as it sits today, and who's playing catch up, in your opinion, and either in denial still, like they somehow think that the world hasn't fundamentally shifted and that it'll somehow go back to the status quo. Who's in denial, in your opinion, whether it's in Europe, whether it's anywhere? And who you mentioned a couple countries, but who likely really kind of elevates?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. So I think I'll speak to the countries that I did have firsthand exposure on first. Um, I think one thing I'll say across the board is after the Hormuz situation, I don't think anybody is on the fence anymore. I think maybe till last year, a lot of countries were like, we'll go slower on the diversification, or we'll go slower on upping defense spending, or we maybe will not sign on to energy deals from like Venezuela or US or Canada because we'll just rely on the Middle East. Like all of that has changed overnight. And I think you're seeing all the market talk also is now very certain that the aftershocks are going to be not short term. They're going to be long term. And I think geopolitically now everyone is certain that they do need to start planning for this being permanent. This kind of reorder where the US is pulling out public goods. It's not going to be the partner, providing global security or long-term alliances or things like this, that they have to start thinking from a sovereignty perspective. So I think that is now I see very certain across the board. I think the countries that have read the Trump game and they understand his larger intentions, those countries are ramping up really fast and they're getting a lot of deals really fast as well. So Poland, like I said, is a big winner, I think, in Europe. France is actually a big loser, like France is actually getting sidelined even within. So it has, I think, almost no NATO commands anymore. There's very few deals where the US is actively collaborating. I think this Franco-German axis of Europe that existed, Germany has been like hot and cold with Trump, so there's some revival in the ties and then there's a sort of decline. So I think France and, Brussels, like the EU bureaucracy and stuff, they're moving slower, but these Eastern European countries, Germany, Italy, like these countries are really, they're getting with the program. Like they're moving fast on this. The Middle East had aligned very early, I think, with the U.S. Proposals. So at least, UAE, Saudi, Qatar economically were aligned, but then they refused to work with Israel, apart from UAE, of course, which signed the Abraham Accords. And I think now they're being forced into some kind of alliance. It's like, so like I said in our first episode, there's two public goods that the US is going to pull out from the world order. One is your security umbrella. And for that, you need to settle regional conflicts, or those things will keep persisting. And the
Mhm.
biggest one in the Middle East is Israel. And Israel cannot be settled unless there's a Saudi Israel kind of rapprochement, you know? So that has to happen, right? I think what I read from the current Trump moves is that also needs to happen, apart from these deals that the Middle East has made and AI and stuff like that, right? So once that happens and the Iran situation is handled and the Middle East becomes this fast growing bloc, um, what I saw on the ground in New Delhi is I think India struggled a bit with Trump. And I think there was a lot of discomfort with the fact that Pakistan became so became aligned with Trump, or Trump started promoting them, because it gives this was a historical issue that
Sure.
India faced, where multiple times the U.S. backed Pakistan against India. So so that I think so. India I've seen struggle has been struggling a bit with Trump, but from what I saw right now, they have the deal worked out. There's a lot of momentum, at least at the leadership level, to get things going. I think the ASEAN countries are a little bit at a disadvantage because they were the fast growing bloc of the world, but now a lot of them are getting flooded with Chinese goods. Their growth rates are slowing down a little bit because, China has this aggressive export push, a bulk of which is going into ASEAN. So their industrial bases are getting hollowed out and impacted now. So it's a mixed bag, like this is from what
It
I can
seems
see.
it seems like to me, as strong as it's been for the last 50 years, as it's kind of gone on its trajectory, it seems to me that Singapore is in a very strong position to become the capital hub at a
Mhm.
bigger level than it's been because of the uncertainties. Hong Kong's still there, but it's not really where you're probably going to feel long term safe if there's some kind of grand bargain. It's too close to China or Taiwan. It's also inside of mainland China as this little thing, and Singapore obviously benefited from a little bit of capital flight that could always return from UAE and things like that for that, but seems as though that's going to be a long term beneficiary in the media and also long term. Do you agree with that?
I don't really, because I think Singapore really, it's because of Hormuz that it became preeminent again. A lot of momentum was shifting to Dubai over Singapore in terms of the alternative finance hub. And I think if something opens on Taiwan in some time, Singapore is.
Or something.
I mean, I don't know if I don't know what bargain has been worked out with China, but um, that is going to remain the flashpoint. Like Japan is, so I think the way the things are working, like the U.S. is kind of creating regional hegemons of the security order. So you
Yeah.
see Israel and UAE becoming that in the Middle East, and it's Japan that's becoming that for Asia, right? For Taiwan, it's actually Japan that the US was encouraging to guarantee security or be the backer of security, right? So I don't think it's off the table. I think if something happens on Taiwan, I don't think the US will do anything right now because they need to settle Europe and Middle East. These regions need to settle, like Ukraine and Iran need to settle. But I think long term that flashpoint remains, and I think Why is the US moving its defense posture to Indo-Pacific? I don't think for a moment that it's gonna be the most secure region, you know?
Mm.
Um, so I think Singapore, yes, great from a policy lens and everything, but very vulnerable, like even on the Navy side, a lot of the it's a major hub for that, for refueling ships. Like if there's a conflict, they will be in the crosshairs. Like there's no way that China's not attacking Singapore if there's a naval war, right?
Interesting. Well, I'm glad you pushed back on it. And I was saying what I think based on a lot of the narrative arc there, and I've always had this gut sense of, is that more hype than not? I've been to Singapore. It's a beautiful place, beautiful
Yeah.
country, wonderful economy. Feel you can walk down the street with your wallet hanging out and feel safe. I mean, but what you just said, and I love how easy and fast I don't think so. I don't agree. Like I love it when people don't agree because then I actually learned something. You can see I can see your point that it's in the crosshairs of a potential future,
Yeah.
you know, disagreement, and therefore it's at risk. It's more vulnerable than people think. So were you saying then that in that sense, the two things again are the security responsibility and the bill that comes with it, who's going to pay it? And Japan's agreed and stepped up now to basically be one of those regional hegemons,
Yeah.
and we're kind of aligned well with them. Do you think that changes in any way? We had a question from Melissa, another one from Randy, but I'm going to focus on the one from Melissa because what if there's a change of regime here in the sense of the political parties that are in control? Like, let's say that we get back to a more neoliberal, whether it's a Democrat or a Rhino Republican um, type of leadership in 2028. Do you think this changes fundamentally, or is this setup of Japan and these regional hegemons kind of going to have enough momentum where everybody kind of just continues on? What are your gut thoughts?
Yeah. I think this is again where the answer is counterintuitive. Like you may think as a American observer or a civilian that, oh, it's just Trump and like, once if Trump is out, then everything is back to normal. But you're not understanding the systemic way that countries are perceiving this, because now it's like every government around the world believes at its core that it cannot rely on American public goods. It cannot rely on alliances. They could get wiped out. Like they need to worry about themselves first, right?
Mm.
And so that means like every government is now starting this capex cycle of investing in defense, building its bilateral alliances, like really kind of playing all sides, figuring out who has their back, who doesn't. Like, this is happening at a systemic level, right? So we still have like 3 more years, like 2.5 more years. Like, I can assure you this gets locked in as the way that people think about, it's going to
Well,
take,
your point is kind of made. Like to analogize it, it's almost like if your parents tell you that they're going to cut you off, that's different than if they cut you off.
yeah,
Because once they actually cut you off, you have to make some decisions. And
yeah,
usually, in the process of you dealing with the reality called "I got cut off," that doesn't mean your parents can't still be generous. They can
yeah,
still choose to be generous, but you don't have the guarantee of that
yeah,
anymore. And because of that, you now start to either fail completely or you start to grow up. And as you
yeah,
grow up, you don't ungrow up.
yeah,
Like you don't forget about sovereignty because once you have a taste of it and you've kind of then you kind of go, well, you know what? I don't want to be that vulnerable again. And so
yeah,
lock it in really means just being serious about I'm cutting you off. I'll still be generous. If you do what I like, I'll still be generous. Or I might nudge you a little bit with some generosity to get you to do what I like, but I'm done. And as soon
yeah,
as they know you're serious, they have to move for their own reasons. They don't have a choice. Otherwise they fail.
yeah,
And then that's hard to uncodify from their consciousness. So this almost
yeah,
guilt of individual sovereignty,
yeah,
part of the
absolutely.
mandate locks it in a real way.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I think from a security lens, that is exactly what's happening. And there's something else happening from an economic lens. Because what do you see on the economic lens is a lot of people are talking about even everywhere I've been are like, oh, the US stock market is just these AI companies, like it's just an over levered bet on AI and things like that. But what's happening is all this US capex in AI, now it started a cycle in all these other countries. Like they've started doing capex investments in AI. They're like, oh, I have to build data centers. I have to build this new economic stack. I need to go nuclear. So this is starting, and this is going to again lead to a cycle of a sort of self fulfilling prophecy where it's not like the US went around saying, persuading every country, like, this is the new economic stack, let's all agree and do it. Like, the US just went all in into this. And now every country is like, I need to go all in into this. Like, I'm missing the bus. Like, I'm missing the boat. Like, every business person I met is like, they might be running a school or something, but they're asking me like, how can I set up a critical minerals factory or like, how, so it's happening. Like, so
Right.
when this starts happening economically and that starts happening security wise, you are going to end up with a different world order in 3 years, whether you want it or not. And I don't think anyone can come in and like easily reverse that. Like, it's not going to happen very easily.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting, very interesting. I think that's a great place to pin it, and now tell them all the reasons again why you should subscribe to Tanvi, read her work, support her work, share it. I got smarter once again, Tanvi, thank you, on my own perspectives in the last 80 minutes, and I want to thank you for that. It's always a pleasure. And thank you everybody for tuning in live. Thank you for tuning in on the replay. The show notes and the replay will be out. If you're listening to this after the fact, you've got a great resource to connect with her on all fronts. And we'll keep following your work and staying smarter. Thanks for being on the atomic level, Tommy.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who tuned in.